As I stepped out of my BMW at the grand opening of the community wellness center I'd founded, I saw Patricia Caldwell standing frozen at the entrance. The same woman who had once called me a gold-digging nurse who trapped her son was now staring at the bronze plaque that read, "The Sarah Caldwell Memorial Wellness Center, founded by Dr. Emma Chen, in loving memory of a woman who taught us that healing comes from understanding, not judgment." 3 years after she'd tried to destroy my marriage, my former mother-in-law was about to discover what her son had really written about me in his private journal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. But if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me back up and tell you exactly how we got here. How a girl from a small immigrant family became the woman stepping out of that BMW about to change the lives of the very people who once tried to diminish her spirit. My name is Emma Chen, and this is the story of how I discovered my true worth when the people closest to me tried to convince me I had none. 3 years ago, I was nobody special in the eyes of the Caldwell family, just a pediatric nurse from a modest background who had somehow managed to capture the heart of their precious son, Michael Caldwell. The Caldwells weren't just wealthy, they were Millbrook royalty, with a medical dynasty spanning 4 generations and a social standing that opened every door in our small Oregon town. I grew up in nearby Harmony Valley, a working-class community about 30 minutes from the gleaming medical campus where the Caldwells held court. My parents, David and Lisa Chen, ran a small family restaurant called Golden Lotus that barely kept us comfortable financially, but overflowed with love, laughter, and the most incredible fusion cuisine you've ever tasted. Dad had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and an unshakable work ethic, while Mom balanced the books and created recipes that somehow made every customer feel like family. Money was always tight in our little house on Elm Street, but respect and genuine care for others were abundant. My parents taught me that true worth comes from how you treat people, especially those who can't do anything for you in return. They showed me through their own example how hard work, integrity, and compassion could build something meaningful from nothing. Every evening after school, I'd help serve customers at Golden Lotus, learning that success wasn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the number of lives you touched positively. That foundation carried me through nursing school at Oregon State University, where I discovered my calling working with children facing serious illnesses. There's something profound about caring for young patients. Their resilience teaches you things about healing that no textbook can convey. I specialized in pediatric oncology, drawn to families navigating the most frightening chapter of their lives. My professors noticed my natural ability to create calm in chaotic situations, to help both children and parents find hope when medical terminology felt overwhelming. After graduation, I landed my dream position in the pediatric ward at Riverside General Hospital in Millbrook. The work was emotionally demanding but incredibly fulfilling. I wasn't just administering medications and monitoring vital signs. I was translating complex medical procedures into language families could understand, coordinating support services and creating tiny moments of joy for children who spent weeks away from everything familiar. The Caldwell family, meanwhile, represented everything opposite to my upbringing. They were the founding family of Millbrook, with a medical empire that dominated the region's healthcare landscape. Patricia Caldwell ran the most prestigious family practice in town, commanding respect and fear in equal measure from both colleagues and patients. Her husband, Dr. Robert Caldwell, served as chief of surgery at Riverside General, a position that made him essentially untouchable within the hospital hierarchy. Their social standing wasn't just about money, though they certainly had plenty of that. It was about legacy, influence, and the kind of inherited authority that made ordinary people feel insignificant just by proximity. The Caldwell name appeared on hospital wings, medical scholarships, and charitable foundations throughout the region. They carried themselves with the absolute certainty that came from generations of unquestioned social dominance. Patricia Caldwell was particularly formidable, a woman who could diagnose your social shortcomings within seconds of meeting you. She possessed the kind of polished elegance that made you immediately aware of every imperfection in your own appearance, every gap in your cultural knowledge, every indication that you didn't belong in her rarefied world. Her silver hair was always styled to perfection. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of pieces that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her social calendar read like a directory of Oregon's political and medical elite. Robert Caldwell commanded boardrooms and operating theaters with equal authority. At 68, he still cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with distinguished gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to assess everyone's net worth and potential usefulness within moments of introduction. He spoke with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, someone whose opinions carried weight in hospital board meetings and state medical association gatherings. When I met their son Michael at a hospital charity fundraiser, I was there volunteering to coordinate activities for the children's ward. The event was held in the hospital's main conference center, transformed for the evening with elegant decorations and silent auction displays featuring everything from weekend getaways to expensive medical equipment. I had organized a special corner where young patients could create artwork to be auctioned alongside the more traditional items, believing that including the children's perspectives would add meaning to the fundraising efforts. Michael was completing his residency in emergency medicine, and unlike the other doctors I'd encountered from prominent families, he seemed genuinely interested in the work rather than just the prestige. While other physicians made polite conversation and moved on to more influential donors, Michael spent nearly an hour in our children's activity area, asking thoughtful questions about how we helped young patients cope with extended hospital stays. "You have an incredible way with the kids," he said, watching me help a 7-year-old girl with leukemia create a painting for the auction. "I've never seen someone make a hospital feel less scary just by being present. How do you do that?" His question surprised me because it suggested he understood that healing involved more than medical procedures. "I think children sense when you're genuinely interested in them as people rather than just patients," I replied, helping little Sarah choose colors for her sunset painting. "They need to feel like their thoughts and feelings matter, especially when so many adults are making decisions about their bodies without consulting them." Michael nodded thoughtfully, watching as Sarah carefully added purple clouds to her artwork. "In emergency medicine, we're trained to think fast and act decisively, but sometimes I wonder if we move too quickly past the human element. You seem to understand something about patient care that medical school never taught me." That conversation sparked something between us that felt different from any relationship I'd experienced before. Michael wasn't trying to impress me with his family's status or his own professional achievement. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about my perspective on healthcare, my insights about family dynamics during medical crises, and my ideas about improving patient care beyond clinical intervention. Our romance developed slowly over the following 18 months, built on shared shifts at the hospital, coffee dates in the cafeteria between patient rounds, and long conversations about what it really meant to heal people. Michael would seek me out during his emergency department rotations, asking for advice about how to communicate with frightened children or how to support families facing devastating diagnoses. I began to see that beneath his polished exterior and medical school confidence, he possessed genuine compassion and a desire to be more than just another privileged doctor going through the motions. What drew me to Michael wasn't his family's wealth or social position. Honestly, those things intimidated me more than impressed me. It was his willingness to admit when he didn't know something, his respect for expertise that differed from his own, and his growing understanding that effective medicine required both clinical skills and emotional intelligence. He would spend his lunch breaks in the pediatric ward, not because he was romantically pursuing me, but because he was learning approaches to patient care that his traditional medical education had overlooked. "You see things I miss," he told me one evening, as we walked through Millbrook's small downtown district after particularly challenging shifts. Today, when that little boy came into emergency with a broken arm, I was focused on the fracture and pain management. "You somehow knew that his real terror came from thinking his parents would be angry about the accident. 5 minutes of reassurance from you accomplished more than all my medical interventions." Those conversations made me believe Michael was different from his family's reputation suggests. He seemed to understand that healing involved more than diagnosing and treating diseases, that it required seeing patients as whole human beings, with fears, hopes, and complex family dynamics that affected their medical outcome. I thought I'd found someone who valued my professional insights rather than seeing my nursing background as somehow inferior to physician training. When Michael proposed at sunset on the cliffs overlooking Millbrook Bay, with a modest but beautiful ring he'd saved for months to afford, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. The setting was perfect, wildflowers blooming along the clifftop, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, seabirds calling as they soared overhead. But what made the moment truly special was his proposal itself. "Emma," he said, taking my hands as we stood watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I want to build a life dedicated to helping people in ways that go beyond what either of us could accomplish alone. I can't imagine doing that with anyone but you. You've taught me that medicine is about so much more than clinical expertise. It's about understanding people, supporting families, and creating environments where healing can happen on multiple levels." The ring was simple but perfect, a classic solitaire setting with a stone that caught the fading sunlight beautifully. More importantly, it represented months of careful saving from Michael's resident salary, rather than a casual purchase from the family trust fund. He had chosen it himself, thinking about what would suit my style rather than what would impress his parents' social circle. "I know my family can be overwhelming," he continued, sliding the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled slightly from nervousness. "But I need you to know that what we're building together is separate from all of that. This is about us creating something meaningful based on our shared values and commitment to making healthcare more compassionate." In that moment, standing on the cliffs with the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers, I believed completely in our future together. Michael seemed to understand and value everything that made me who I was: my dedication to pediatric patients, my innovative approaches to family support, my belief that healthcare should be accessible and compassionate rather than intimidating and hierarchical. I thought I was marrying someone who would be my equal partner in both love and professional purpose. The engagement period stretched ahead of us for 18 months, which Michael Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Explained was necessary to coordinate with his residency schedule and allow his family time to plan what they considered an appropriate celebration. At the time, I interpreted this as consideration for everyone's busy schedules rather than the systematic conditioning program it would actually become. Looking back now, standing outside that wellness center 3 years later, I can see how naive I was about what I was actually agreeing to when I accepted Michael's proposal. I thought I was joining a partnership based on mutual respect and shared value. I had no idea I was about to enter a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to transform me from Emma Chen, pediatric nursing specialist, into Mrs. Michael Caldwell, appropriately grateful accessory to a medical dynasty. But that night on the cliffs, with Michael's arms around me and the ring sparkling on my finger, I believed in fairy tales. I believed that love could bridge any gap between different worlds, that mutual respect could overcome family prejudices, and that two people committed to healing others could create something beautiful together. I had no idea that some families view love not as acceptance of who you are but as an opportunity to remake you into who they think you should be. I didn't understand that in the Caldwell world, being chosen meant being systematically diminished, until you forgot you had ever been anything more than grateful for the privilege of their approval. The woman who would step out of that BMW 3 years later, however, had learned something far more valuable than anything Michael's family could have taught her. She had discovered that true worth doesn't come from other people's validation. It comes from building something meaningful with your own hands, your own heart, and your own unshakable understanding of what really matters in this world. The first time I walked into the Caldwell family home, I felt like Alice stepping through the looking glass into a world where everything familiar suddenly seemed inadequate. Their estate sat on 15 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds in Millbrook Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in town. The colonial mansion, with its white columns and sweeping circular driveway, looked like something from a magazine spread about American aristocracy. Michael had prepared me as best he could during the drive over, explaining family traditions and warning me about his parents' formal communication style. "They're not intentionally intimidating," he said, though his tight grip on the steering wheel suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own words. "They just come from a generation where medical families maintained certain standards of presentation. Try not to take anything personally if they seem reserved at first." The front door opened before we could ring the bell, revealing a woman who commanded attention simply by existing. Patricia Caldwell stood in the doorway wearing what I would later learn was her standard uniform for family gatherings, a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, pearl earrings that caught the afternoon light, and an expression that managed to convey both welcome and evaluation simultaneously. "Michael, darling," she said, embracing her son with the careful precision of someone mindful of her appearance. "And you must be how lovely to finally meet the young woman who has captured our son's attention so completely." The phrasing struck me as odd, even then, captured his attention, as if I were a temporary fascination rather than someone he'd been dating seriously for over a year. But Patricia's smile seemed genuine enough, and I reminded myself that meeting potential in-laws was naturally awkward for everyone involved. "Mrs. Caldwell, thank you so much for inviting me," I replied, offering the small bouquet of flowers I'd brought from my parents' garden. "These are from my mother's rose bushes. She grows the most beautiful varieties and insisted I bring something to show our appreciation." Patricia accepted the flowers with polite grace, though I caught her quick glance at the simple arrangement, clearly homegrown rather than professionally designed. "How thoughtful. We'll have to find just the right vase for these charming blooms." The word charming would become a constant refrain during my time with the Caldwell family, always delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach the eye. Everything about me would be described as charming: my enthusiasm for my work, my stories about growing up in my parents' restaurant, my ideas about improving patient care. Charming, I would learn, was code for endearingly naive but ultimately inconsequential. Robert Caldwell emerged from what Michael had described as his father's study, extending a firm handshake, and the kind of penetrating stare I imagined he used to assess surgical candidates. "Emma, excellent to meet you. Michael has spoken of you frequently, though he's been rather modest about the details of your background." This seemed like an invitation to share information about myself, though something in his tone suggested I was being interviewed rather than welcomed into casual conversation. "I'm a pediatric nurse at Riverside General," I began, but Robert was already nodding in a way that indicated he'd moved past my professional identity to more pressing concerns. Yes, Michael mentioned your work with children. Tell me about your family's background. What does your father do for work?" The question seemed straightforward enough, but the way he asked it made me acutely aware that my answer would be measured against some unstated standard. "My parents own Golden Lotus, a restaurant in Harmony Valley. Dad immigrated from Taiwan about 30 years ago and built the business from nothing. Mom handles the administrative side while creating fusion recipes that have made the restaurant a real community gathering place." Robert nodded with the expression of someone processing information for future reference. "Immigrants often possess admirable work ethic. The restaurant business must be quite challenging, especially for someone adapting to American commercial practice." I felt a subtle sting in his response, the implication that my father's success was noteworthy primarily because it represented an immigrant overcoming natural disadvantages, rather than a skilled businessman building something valuable. But I smiled and agreed that the restaurant industry was indeed competitive, choosing not to mention that Golden Lotus had won multiple local awards and regularly catered events for Harmony Valley's business community. Dinner that evening was served in a dining room that could have accommodated 20 people, though only the four of us sat around one end of the mahogany table that gleamed under the crystal chandelier. The meal itself was excellent, clearly prepared by professional kitchen staff. But the conversation felt like a carefully orchestrated performance where I was simultaneously the audience and the subject being evaluated. Patricia asked about my education, nodding approvingly when I mentioned my nursing degree from Oregon State University, but following up with questions that revealed her assumption that nursing was a temporary career choice rather than a lifelong professional commitment. "What a wonderful foundation for understanding the medical field," she said warmly. "I imagine that background will be invaluable as you transition into supporting Michael's career advancement." The comment confused me because I hadn't mentioned any intention to transition away from nursing. If anything, I was hoping to expand my expertise in pediatric family support services, possibly pursuing additional certification in child life specialization. But Patricia seemed to have already decided that my nursing background was primarily valuable as preparation for becoming a doctor's wife rather than as an end in itself. Actually, I said carefully, I'm really passionate about my work with pediatric oncology patients. I've been developing some innovative family support protocols that I think could be implemented more broadly across children's hospitals. Patricia's smile remained perfectly in place, but something subtle shifted in her expression. How ambitious of you, dear. Though I imagine once you and Michael marry and start a family of your own, you'll find your priorities naturally evolving toward more personal fulfillment. More personal fulfillment. The implication was clear. My current work with critically ill children was somehow less personally fulfilling than the domestic role she was already envisioning for me. I glanced at Michael, hoping he might clarify that we hadn't discussed me leaving nursing, but he was nodding along as if his mother's assumptions were perfectly reasonable. Robert took a different approach, steering the conversation toward topics where he could demonstrate the Caldwell family's prominence within the medical community. He casually mentioned his recent consultation on a high-profile surgery, Patricia's appointment to the state medical board, and their family's endowment of a new cardiac wing at Portland General Hospital. These weren't boasts exactly, but rather matter-of-fact recitations of their influence that made it clear they operated in circles far beyond my experience. The medical community in Oregon is quite close-knit, Robert observed, cutting his prime rib with surgical precision. Family reputation carries significant weight in advancement opportunities. Michael's last name opens doors that might otherwise require years of additional effort to access. I nodded politely, though the comment seemed to suggest that Michael's success was predetermined by family connections, rather than earned through his own abilities. More troubling was the implicit message that my own family background offered no comparable advantages, that I brought nothing to the relationship, except personal qualities that would need to be refined to meet Caldwell's standard. As coffee was served in the living room, Patricia began what I would come to recognize as her signature technique for establishing social hierarchy, through seemingly innocent questions. Emma dear, tell us about your hobbies and interests outside of work. What do you enjoy doing in your free time? I mentioned my love of reading, particularly books about child psychology and family dynamics, thinking this might demonstrate intellectual curiosity relevant to my professional development. I also talked about hiking Oregon's coastal trails, my amateur photography, and the volunteer tutoring I did at Harmony Valley's after-school program for immigrant children. Patricia listened with the expression of someone politely enduring a child's recitation of summer vacation activity. How lovely that you stay active outdoors. Exercise is so important for maintaining an appropriate appearance, and volunteer work shows such community spirit, though I imagine you'll want to focus your charitable energies on causes more aligned with medical family expectations once you're established in Millbrook society. Medical family expectations. Causes more aligned with their social position. Even my volunteer work with immigrant children, some of whom were patients I'd met through the hospital, was being evaluated for its appropriateness to my future role rather than its intrinsic value or personal meaning to me. The evening concluded with air kisses and promises to see each other again soon, but I left feeling like I'd failed a test I hadn't known I was taking. During the drive back to my apartment, I tried to process what had felt so unsettling about the interaction. Your parents seem very accomplished, I said to Michael, choosing my words carefully, though I got the impression they might have some concerns about our relationship. Michael glanced at me with surprise. Concerns? Emma, they loved you. Mom was already talking about introducing you to Mrs. Willington for etiquette consultation, and Dad mentioned that you seemed like someone who would adapt well to our family's social responsibilities. Adapt well to their social responsibility, not contribute to their family dynamic or enhance their lives through my own qualities, but adapt to their existing structure. The word choice felt significant, though I couldn't quite articulate why it bothered me so much. What kind of etiquette consultation? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Oh, it's just a Millbrook tradition. Michael said with the casual tone of someone who'd never questioned family customs. Mrs. Wellington has worked with all the prominent medical families for decades. She helps new wives understand the social protocols that come with our position in the community, things like appropriate conversation topics for medical society events, proper attire for different types of gatherings, that sort of thing. New wives, as if there were an established curriculum for becoming the appropriate spouse of a Caldwell family member. The idea that I would need professional instruction in how to behave socially felt simultaneously insulting and terrifying. Michael, I said slowly, do you think I need etiquette training? Have I done something tonight that embarrassed you or your family? He reached over to squeeze my hand reassuringly. Of course not. You were perfect. It's just that Mom and Dad want to make sure you feel confident navigating the medical community social scene. These events can be intimidating if you're not familiar with the expectations. Perfect, but requiring professional refinement. Competent, but needing guidance from someone who specialized in training wives to meet medical family standards. I was beginning to understand that in the Caldwell world, love meant molding someone into an acceptable version of themselves rather than celebrating who they already were. Over the following weeks, Patricia began what she presented as helpful guidance but felt increasingly like systematic reconstruction of my identity. She would call with suggestions about everything from my wardrobe choices to my communication style at the hospital. Emma, dear, she said during one particularly memorable phone conversation, I happened to mention to Dr. Richardson that you were Michael's fiancée, and he said he'd seen you in the pediatric ward during his consultations. He commented that you seemed very enthusiastic in your interactions with patients' families. Enthusiastic, another word that sounded positive but carried implications of excess, of inappropriate intensity that needed moderation. Is that a problem? I asked, genuinely confused about what behavior I might need to modify. Not a problem exactly, Patricia replied with the patient tone of someone explaining social nuances to a child, but medical families maintain a certain professional distance that helps preserve appropriate boundaries. Too much emotional investment in individual cases can be seen as unprofessional, even when it comes from a caring heart. This advice directly contradicted everything I'd learned about effective pediatric nursing, where building trust with families was essential to positive patient outcomes. But Patricia spoke with such authority that I found myself questioning my own professional instincts. The wedding planning process became another vehicle for Patricia to demonstrate how thoroughly my preferences would need to align with Caldwell family tradition. When I mentioned hoping for a small intimate ceremony that would accommodate my elderly grandmother's limited mobility, Patricia nodded sympathetically before explaining why that approach wouldn't work. Of course we want to honor your family's needs, she said, but Michael's position in the medical community means our guest list will naturally include several hundred colleagues and associates. The ceremony really needs to reflect the Caldwell family's standing in the region. Several hundred guests for what I'd imagined as a celebration of love between Michael and me, a ceremony that needed to reflect his family's standing rather than our personal values or preferences. I was learning that even my own wedding would be primarily about maintaining the Caldwell family's social image, rather than celebrating the union of two people who'd chosen each other. When I hesitantly suggested that my parents might like to contribute to some wedding expenses, they had insisted on offering what they could afford. Patricia's response revealed the delicate balance of accepting their gesture while ensuring it wouldn't actually influence any decision. How generous of them, she said warmly. We could certainly designate their contribution towards something meaningful, perhaps the flower arrangements or program, though of course the major elements, venue, catering, entertainment, will need to meet certain standards that require working with vendors familiar with events of this scope. Their contribution could be accepted but contained, applied to decorative elements, while the substantial decisions remained under Caldwell control. My parents' money was welcomed as a symbolic gesture of participation, but their opinions about how it should be spent were irrelevant. Most disturbing was watching Michael's gradual transformation from the thoughtful, curious man I'd fallen in love with into someone who seemed to accept his parents' perspective without question. The conversations we'd once shared about improving patient care and challenging healthcare hierarchies became less frequent, replaced by discussions about his career advancement and our future social obligations. "Mom makes some good points about professional boundaries," he said one evening when I mentioned feeling frustrated by Patricia's advice about moderating my enthusiasm with pediatric families. "Maybe we could benefit from taking a more strategic approach to your career development." Strategic approach to my career development. As if my passion for helping sick children and their families was a problem to be managed rather than a strength to be celebrated. The man who had once valued my insights about patient care was now suggesting I needed guidance from his mother about how to be appropriately professional. The transformation was so gradual that I barely noticed it happening until I realized I'd stopped sharing my ideas about innovative family support programs with Michael because he'd begun responding with suggestions about how those ideas might be perceived by his parents, rather than engaging with their merit. The person who had once encouraged my professional ambitions was now evaluating them through the lens of Caldwell family approval. By the time our engagement reached its halfway point, I felt like I was living in a carefully controlled experiment designed to test how completely I could be reshaped without losing my essential functionality. Patricia's guidance had expanded to cover everything from my conversation topics at hospital social events to my choice of continuing education courses. Even my friendship patterns were subject to subtle evaluation based on whether my associates enhanced or diminished my suitability as Michael's future wife. The most painful realization was that I was beginning to internalize their standards, questioning my own instincts and preferences because they'd been consistently presented as charming but inadequate. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw Emma Chen, dedicated pediatric nurse with innovative ideas about family-centered care. Instead, I saw someone who needed constant improvement to become worthy of her elevated social position. The woman who would eventually step out of that BMW at her own wellness center was still buried somewhere inside the increasingly anxious person who spent her evenings wondering whether her enthusiasm for her work was professionally inappropriate, whether her family's restaurant represented an embarrassing background, and whether love was supposed to feel like a constant performance evaluation. But she was still there, that determined woman with unshakable values and genuine compassion for others. She was just waiting for the right moment to remember who she really was, beneath all the Caldwell family refinement. That moment would come sooner than anyone expected, triggered by a public humiliation so devastating that it would shatter every illusion about what it really meant to be accepted into the Caldwell world. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, because it forces you to choose between becoming someone you're not and reclaiming someone you've always been. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical process that began with Patricia's weekly guidance sessions at the Caldwell estate. Every Thursday afternoon, I would drive up the winding driveway for what she called preparation for married life in the medical community. These sessions were presented as generous mentorship from an experienced physician's wife, who wanted to help me succeed in my new role. Miss Wellington turned out to be a formidable woman in her 70s, who had spent decades refining the wives of prominent doctors, lawyers, and business leaders throughout Oregon. Her credentials were impeccable. She had trained the wives of 2 governors, countless judges, and virtually every major medical family patriarch in the state. Patricia spoke of her with the reverence usually reserved for medical specialists, as if social refinement were a complex procedure requiring expert intervention. "My dear Emma," Miss Wellington said during our first consultation, studying me with the clinical eye of someone accustomed to identifying deficiencies that needed correction, "you possess natural warmth and intelligence, but these qualities need careful channeling to serve your future position effectively. Raw enthusiasm, while charming, can overwhelm people who aren't prepared for such intensity." The sessions took place in Patricia's sun-drenched sitting room, surrounded by family portraits spanning 4 generations of medical achievements. Miss Wellington would arrive precisely at 2 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio filled with typed notes about appropriate behavior for various social situations. She approached social conditioning with the same systematic methodology that physicians used for complex diagnoses. "Conversation at medical society events requires particular finesse," she explained, opening her portfolio to a section labeled Professional Social Interaction. "The goal is not to contribute your own opinions, but to facilitate others' discussions through thoughtful questions and appropriate responses. Medical wives serve as social lubricants, making everyone feel comfortable while ensuring conversations flow smoothly toward productive conclusions. Social lubricants. The phrase made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. It suggested that my role would be purely functional to make other people's interactions more pleasant, without adding substantive content of my own. When I asked for clarification about how to handle situations where I actually had relevant knowledge or experience, Mrs. Wellington's response was swift and definitive. "Knowledge and experience are wonderful personal assets," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "but social gatherings aren't educational forums. Your expertise in pediatric nursing, while admirable, isn't particularly relevant to discussions about hospital administration, research funding, or medical policy. Better to listen carefully and ask questions that demonstrate your interest in learning from those with broader perspectives." My years of direct patient care, my understanding of how medical decisions affected families, my insights into the gaps between clinical treatment and emotional support, all dismissed as narrow specialization that couldn't contribute meaningfully to important conversation. I was being taught that my professional knowledge was appropriate for my day job but irrelevant to serious discussions among medical decision-makers. The etiquette instruction extended far beyond conversation protocols. Mrs. Wellington provided detailed guidance about appropriate attire for different types of events, explaining how my clothing choices would reflect not only on me, but on Michael's professional reputation and the entire Caldwell family's social standing. She brought fabric swatches and style magazines, pointing out subtle differences between appropriate and inappropriate options. "This navy dress would be perfect for hospital fundraising events," she said, showing me a conservative but elegant design, "while this red one would be too attention-seeking for someone in your position." Medical wives should enhance their husband's presence without overshadowing them. The goal is sophisticated support, not individual statement-making. I found myself taking notes during these sessions, writing down rules I'd never imagined existed. Navy was safe for most events, but not too dark that it seemed somber. Red was acceptable for holiday parties, but inappropriate for serious fundraisers. Jewelry should be understated but not so minimal that it suggested financial insecurity. Hair should be styled but not trendy, makeup polished but not dramatic. Even my body language was subject to refinement. Miss Wellington spent an entire session teaching me how to stand, sit, and gesture in ways that conveyed appropriate deference while maintaining dignity. "Posture communicates authority levels," she explained, demonstrating the subtle difference between confident and commanding presence. "You want to appear poised and capable without suggesting you consider yourself equal to the senior physicians and administrators you'll be meeting." Without suggesting I considered myself equal. The implication was that I needed to internalize and project my own inferiority to make others comfortable with my presence. I was learning to perform my own diminishment, so skillfully that it would seem natural rather than imposed. The most insidious aspect of this conditioning was how reasonable it all seemed when presented as caring guidance from people who wanted me to succeed. Patricia would frame each suggestion as protection from social embarrassment. Miss Wellington would present corrections as gifts of insider knowledge, and Michael would support their recommendations as evidence of his family's investment in our future together. "Mom's just trying to help you avoid the mistakes she made when she was first married," Michael said when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by all the behavioral expectations. "She learned these protocols the hard way and wants to save you from similar awkwardness." But I began to notice that Patricia's own behavior didn't follow many of the rules I was being taught. She expressed strong opinions during medical discussions, wore statement jewelry that certainly drew attention, and commanded rooms in ways that definitely suggested she considered herself equal to anyone present. The protocols I was learning seemed designed specifically for newcomers who needed to earn their place, rather than for established family members who could afford to bend social conventions. My work at the hospital became increasingly complicated as I tried to implement Miss Wellington's guidance about professional boundaries and appropriate emotional investment. The warm, engaged approach that had made me effective with pediatric families was suddenly reframed as potentially problematic. When I mentioned to Patricia that several families had specifically requested me for their children's care, her response revealed how completely my professional accomplishments would be reinterpreted. "How wonderful that families appreciate your caring nature," she said with genuine seeming pleasure. "Though we'll want to be careful that your reputation doesn't become too associated with emotional support rather than clinical competence. Medical families need wives who are respected for their professionalism, not just beloved for their nurturing qualities." Respected for professionalism versus beloved for nurture. The distinction suggested that my natural strengths with patients and families were somehow less valuable than detached clinical efficiency. I was being taught to view my most successful professional qualities as potential liabilities that could undermine my future social position. The wedding planning process became the ultimate test of how thoroughly I could subordinate my preferences to Caldwell family expectations. Every decision, from the venue to the menu to the guests list, was presented as a collaborative choice, while being systematically steered toward Patricia's predetermined vision of an appropriate medical family celebration. When I suggested having the ceremony at Millbrook's Historic Community Center, a beautiful space where my parents could afford to host the reception they wanted to provide, Patricia's response demonstrated the careful balance of appearing to consider my input while ensuring it wouldn't actually influence the outcome. "What a sweet idea," she said, reviewing the brochures I'd brought with what seemed like genuine interest. "The community center certainly has charm, and I can see why it would feel meaningful to your family. However, given the number of distinguished guests we'll need to accommodate, we really require a venue with more sophisticated facilities and catering capabilities." Distinguished guests will need to accommodate guests Michael and I wanted to celebrate with, but distinguished attendees whose comfort and impression management took precedence over our personal preference. My parents' desire to contribute to their daughter's wedding celebration was acknowledged as sweet, but ultimately impractical given the event's real social purpose. The guest list itself became a source of constant negotiation, though negotiation implies two parties with actual decision-making power. Patricia would present additions as necessary inclusions, while my suggestions were evaluated based on whether they enhanced or compromised the event's overall social impact. "We'll definitely include your college friends," she assured me, reviewing my modest list of hoped-for attendees, "though we'll need to be strategic about seating arrangements. Some of your nursing colleagues might feel more comfortable at tables with other healthcare support staff rather than mixed in with the physician families." Healthcare support staff. My professional peers were being categorized as functionally different from physician families, requiring separate seating to avoid social awkwardness that might arise from inappropriate mixing. The wedding I'd imagined as a celebration of love between equals was being designed as a careful orchestration of social hierarchies, where everyone's placement would reinforce existing power structure. Even the ceremony itself was subject to refinement based on Caldwell family traditions and expectations. When I mentioned wanting to include a reading from a poem that had special meaning to Michael and me, something we'd discovered during one of our early conversations about finding hope, medical settings, Patricia's response revealed how thoroughly personal elements would be filtered through social appropriateness standards. "Poetry can be lovely in intimate settings," she said thoughtfully, "but wedding ceremonies for medical families traditionally focus on themes of commitment, service, and community leadership rather than personal sentiment. We'll want readings that reflect the serious responsibilities you're both undertaking as healthcare professionals. Personal sentiment versus serious responsibility." The poem that represented our connection and shared values was classified as insufficiently dignified for public presentation, while readings about professional duty would better serve the ceremony's social messaging requirements. My parents' attempts to participate in wedding planning revealed the careful protocols for managing contributions from families of different social standings. When my mother offered to create centerpieces using flowers from her garden, combined with elegant arrangements from a professional florist, a compromise that would honor both families' aesthetic preferences, Patricia's response demonstrated how such gestures would be handled. "How generous of your mother to want to contribute her gardening talents," Patricia said with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. We could certainly incorporate some of her beautiful blooms into the ceremony decor, perhaps in the outdoor cocktail area where their natural charm would be most appropriate. Natural charm in the outdoor cocktail area, while the sophisticated professional arrangements would grace the main ceremony and reception space. My mother's contribution would be welcomed but contained, visible enough to acknowledge her participation while ensuring it wouldn't interfere with the event's overall polished presentation. The most devastating aspect of this systematic conditioning was watching Michael's gradual alignment with his family's perspective rather than defending our original shared value. The man who had once been fascinated by my insights about patient care began evaluating my professional observations through the lens of social appropriateness rather than clinical merit. Emma, he said one evening when I mentioned feeling frustrated by Miss Wellington's advice about moderating my engagement with pediatric families. Maybe Mom has a point about strategic career development. You're incredibly talented, but talent alone isn't always enough for advancement in competitive medical environments. Strategic career development. Talent alone not enough. The passion and expertise that had originally attracted him to me were now being reframed as insufficient for serious professional success. He was suggesting that my natural abilities needed supplementation through social conditioning rather than celebrating them as unique strengths that could contribute to healthcare innovation. When I tried to discuss my growing concerns about losing myself in all these refinements, Michael's response revealed how completely he'd internalized his family's approach to relationship dynamics. You're not losing yourself, he said with the patient tone of someone correcting a misunderstanding. You're expanding yourself to meet new opportunities. The Emma I fell in love with is still there, she's just being enhanced to succeed in a broader context. My essential identity was being preserved while everything that made that identity meaningful was being systematically modified to serve external expectations. I was learning that in the Caldwell world, love meant accepting the theoretical preservation of someone's core self while transforming every practical expression of that self to meet family standards. The breaking point finally came during what was supposed to be a celebration of our approaching marriage. Patricia had organized an elegant engagement party at the Millbrook Country Club, ostensibly to introduce me formally to the medical community as Michael's future wife. The event was planned with military precision, every detail designed to showcase Caldwell family hospitality while demonstrating my successful integration into their social circle. I spent weeks preparing for the party according to Mrs. Wellington's exacting standards. My dress was professionally selected to convey appropriate sophistication without attention-seeking. My hair was styled by Patricia's personal stylist to achieve the perfect balance of polished and approachable, and I practiced conversation techniques designed to facilitate others' discussions while avoiding controversial topics or personal opinions. The country club was transformed for the evening with elegant floral arrangements, string quartet background music, and a guest list that read like a directory of Oregon's medical and political elite. As I greeted attendees in the receiving line beside Michael and his parents, I felt like an actress playing a role I'd rehearsed extensively but never fully understood. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to Patricia's careful script. I made appropriate small talk with physicians' wives about charitable activities and upcoming social events, asked thoughtful questions about others' work without offering my own professional insight, and presented myself as a grateful newcomer eager to learn from more experienced members of the medical community. Dr. Harrison Mills, the chief of pediatrics at Portland Children's Hospital, engaged me in conversation about my nursing background, and I followed Ms. Wellington's guidance about emphasizing how my experience had prepared me to support Michael's career rather than discussing my own professional ambitions. Pediatric nursing must have given you wonderful insight into family dynamics during medical crises, Dr. Mills said with genuine interest. That understanding will be invaluable as Michael advances in emergency medicine. You'll be able to help him navigate the emotional complexities that medical school doesn't always prepare physicians to handle. Perfect. I was demonstrating exactly the kind of supportive perspective that enhanced Michael's professional potential rather than competing with it. But Dr. Mills' follow-up question caught me off guard because it required a substantive response about my actual expertise, rather than a deflection toward Michael's abilities. I'm curious about your thoughts on family communication protocols during pediatric emergencies, he continued. We've been struggling with consistency in how our emergency department staff interacts with parents during crisis situations. Some families feel overwhelmed by too much information, while others feel excluded from important discussion. This was exactly the kind of question I was passionate about answering. My work with pediatric oncology families had taught me extensive strategies for managing communication during medical emergencies, and I'd developed several innovative approaches that had significantly improved family satisfaction scores at Riverside General. But Ms. Lillington's training kicked in, warning me against presenting myself as an expert who might overshadow the physicians present. That sounds like such a complex challenge, I replied carefully, using the deflection technique I'd been taught. I imagine the physicians and administrators here tonight would have much more sophisticated insights about emergency department protocols than I could offer. Dr. Mills looked puzzled by my response, clearly expecting more substantive engagement from someone with direct experience in the area he was asking about. Well, yes. But you've worked extensively with families during medical crises. Surely you've observed communication strategies that work particularly well or poorly. I felt trapped between Mrs. Wellington's warnings about inappropriate expertise demonstration and a genuine professional conversation that could have been mutually beneficial. My compromise was to offer a modest observation while quickly redirecting attention toward others' superior knowledge. I have noticed that families seem most comfortable when someone takes time to explain not just what's happening but why specific procedures are necessary, I said hesitantly. But I'm sure the emergency physicians here have much more comprehensive approaches to family communication than my limited experience would suggest. Limited experience. I had just described years of specialized work with critically ill children and their families as limited experience insufficient for serious professional discussion. Mills nodded politely but moved on to other conversations, clearly realizing that I wasn't going to provide the insights he'd been hoping to gain. The evening's devastation came during the formal toasts, when Patricia took the microphone to address the assembled medical community about my integration into the Caldwell family. Her speech was a masterpiece of elegant humiliation disguised as generous praise. Dear friends, Patricia began, her voice carrying easily across the elegantly appointed country club dining room. Robert and I are delighted to introduce you formally to Emma Chen, the remarkable young woman who has captured our son Michael's heart and demonstrated such grace in adapting to the responsibilities of medical family life. Captured Michael's heart and demonstrated grace in not contributed to the family or enhanced their lives through her own qualities, but successfully adapted to their existing structure. The phrasing immediately established me as someone who had been chosen and molded rather than someone who had chosen and contributed. When Michael first brought Emma home, Patricia continued with what appeared to be maternal warmth. We knew immediately that she possessed something increasingly rare in today's world. The wisdom to recognize that some contributions to healthcare come not through individual achievement, but through supporting those positioned to create broader impact. Some contributions come not through individual achievement, but through supporting broader impact creators. My professional expertise in pediatric family support was being publicly dismissed as individual achievement, less valuable than supporting someone else's supposedly broader contribution. Patricia was telling every medical professional in the room that my nursing background was preparation for a support role rather than foundation for meaningful healthcare contribution. Emma's background in pediatric nursing has given her wonderful insight into family needs during medical crises, Patricia continued. Insights that will prove invaluable as she helps Michael navigate the emotional complexities of emergency medicine practice. She's learned to channel her natural compassion into understanding what families truly need from medical professionals. Channel her natural compassion into understanding what families need. My professional expertise was being reframed as natural feminine intuition that would help Michael be a better doctor rather than specialized knowledge that could contribute independently to healthcare improvement. Every skill I'd developed through years of education and experience was being reduced to supportive insight for someone else's career advancement. The final devastation came when Patricia described my transition away from direct patient care as evidence of my maturity and commitment to our shared future. Emma has shown remarkable wisdom in recognizing that her greatest contribution to healthcare will come through supporting Michael's advancement, rather than pursuing parallel professional ambitions that might divide her attention and energy. Greatest contribution through supporting rather than pursuing parallel professional ambition. My decision to reduce my hospital hours, a decision I'd made reluctantly under pressure from the Caldwell family, was being presented as an enlightened choice to abandon my own career for the greater good of Michael's success. The applause that followed Patricia's speech felt like a physical assault. 50 of the region's most influential medical professionals were celebrating my transformation from independent healthcare provider into grateful support system for someone else's career. They were applauding my successful diminishment, as if it represented personal growth rather than systematic erosion of professional identity. Standing there in my carefully selected dress, surrounded by elegant decorations and distinguished guests, I experienced a moment of perfect clarity about what my future would hold if I continued down this path. I would become a beautiful, well-mannered accessory to Michael's medical career, someone who enhanced his social standing while slowly forgetting that she had ever been capable of independent contribution to the field she loved. The woman who would eventually step out of that BMW at her own wellness center was born in that moment of devastating recognition. She was still buried beneath months of conditioning and social pressure, but she was awake now, finally understanding that adaptation and diminishment were not the same thing, and that love should expand rather than contract, the fullest expression of who you really are. The ride home from the engagement party passed in suffocating silence. Michael drove through Millbrook's quiet streets while I stared out the passenger window, watching familiar landmarks blur past like scenes from someone else's life. The elegant dress that had made me feel sophisticated hours earlier now felt like a costume I couldn't wait to remove, and the carefully applied makeup felt heavy on my skin, a mask that had fooled everyone including myself. When we finally reached my apartment, Michael walked me to the door with the satisfied air of someone whose evening had exceeded expectations. "That went perfectly," he said, pulling me close for what should have been a romantic goodnight kiss. "Mom was right about how well you'd connect with the medical community. Dr. Mills seemed particularly impressed with your insights about family dynamics." Impressed with my insight? I almost laughed at the irony, remembering how I'd deliberately minimized my expertise to avoid appearing inappropriate. Dr. Mills had been impressed by my careful deflections and humble disclaimers, not by any meaningful professional exchange that might have actually benefited his pediatric emergency protocol. "Michael," I said carefully, testing waters I wasn't sure I was ready to navigate, "how did you feel about your mother's speech tonight?" His face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "Brilliant, wasn't it? She perfectly captured how thoughtfully you've approached joining our family. The way she described your transition from individual nursing practice to supporting my career advancement, it really highlighted your maturity and long-term thinking." Maturity and long-term thinking. My systematic professional diminishment was being celebrated as evidence of wisdom rather than recognized as evidence of systematic pressure to abandon my own ambitions. Michael genuinely believed that watching me become smaller was proof of my growth. "What if I told you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That speech made me feel like everything I've worked for professionally was being dismissed as irrelevant to our future together. Michael's expression shifted to the patient, slightly concerned look I'd seen too many times recently. "Emma, sweetheart, you're being oversensitive." Mom wasn't dismissing your professional background. She was celebrating how you've evolved beyond narrow specialization toward broader family responsibilities. Evolved beyond narrow specialization. My expertise in pediatric family crisis management, my innovative approaches to emotional support during medical emergencies, my understanding of how healthcare systems could better serve vulnerable populations, all reduced to narrow specialization that I'd matured beyond. But what if I don't want to evolve beyond my professional expertise? I asked, feeling something dangerous stirring inside me. What if I think my work with pediatric families is meaningful in its own right, not just as preparation for supporting your career? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge neither of us had expected. Michael studied my face with the expression of someone trying to diagnose an unexpected symptom. "Emma," he said slowly. When you agreed to marry me, I thought you understood what that meant. Being part of the Caldwell family comes with opportunities and responsibilities that extend far beyond individual career preferences. What's good for the family is ultimately good for both of us. What's good for the family is ultimately good for both of us. The Caldwell family's priorities had become our shared priorities, without any actual discussion of what I might want our shared priorities to be. I had been absorbed into their existing structure rather than consulted about what structure we might build together. And what if what's good for the family conflicts with what's good for me as an individual? I pressed, surprised by my own boldness. Michael's patience finally showed signs of strain. Emma, there is no conflict between your individual good and our family good, if you're approaching this relationship with the right perspective. Your individual preferences need to align with our broader family objective. Your individual preferences need to align with our broader family objectives. I was a subsidiary entity whose personal desires were expected to naturally conform to decisions made by people who had never asked what those desires might be. That conversation marked the beginning of my secret awakening, though it would take months before I found the courage to act on what I was beginning to understand. While Michael and his family continued planning our wedding and my future role as a supportive medical wife, I began quietly researching what it would actually take to rebuild my professional life from scratch. The process started with late-night internet searches on my laptop, exploring job opportunities in pediatric nursing that might value innovation and family-centered care, rather than traditional hierarchical approaches. I discovered a whole world of healthcare evolution happening outside the conservative medical establishment that the Caldwells represented: community health initiatives, family advocacy programs, and patient-centered care models that aligned perfectly with everything I'd always believed about healing. Dr. Sarah Kim's name kept appearing in articles about innovative pediatric care approaches. She directed the family support services at Portland Children's Hospital and had published extensively about community-based healthcare models that addressed social determinants of health, rather than just treating medical symptoms in isolation. Her work represented everything I'd dreamed of pursuing before I'd been convinced that such aspirations were professionally inappropriate. I began following her research publications, studying the programs she'd developed, and understanding how my own experience with pediatric families could contribute to the kind of comprehensive care she was pioneering. For the first time in months, I felt intellectually engaged and professionally excited rather than constantly anxious about whether I was performing my diminished role appropriately. The breakthrough came when I attended a pediatric nursing conference in Portland, ostensibly to fulfill my continuing education requirements, but actually to hear Dr. Kim speak about family-centered care innovation. I told Michael and Patricia that I was attending workshops about supporting physicians' family members during medical training, a half-truth that satisfied their expectations while allowing me to pursue my real interests. Dr. Kim's presentation was everything I'd hoped for and more. She discussed research showing that family support specialists could significantly improve patient outcomes, reduce hospital readmission rates, and enhance overall satisfaction with medical care. More importantly, she described family advocates as essential healthcare team members rather than support staff for other professionals' work. We've discovered that families need specialized advocates who understand both medical procedures and emotional dynamics. Kim explained to the packed auditorium, "These aren't ancillary support roles, they're central to effective healthcare delivery." Some of our most successful interventions have come from family advocates who identified problems that clinical staff missed. Central to effective healthcare delivery. Problems that clinical staff missed. My expertise in family dynamics during medical crises wasn't preparation for supporting someone else's career. It was specialized knowledge that could independently contribute to better patient outcomes. During the conference break, I approached Dr. Kim with questions about her research methodology, and our conversation revealed how much my practical experience aligned with her theoretical framework. She was particularly interested in my observations about communication gaps between medical staff and families during pediatric emergencies. "You're describing exactly the kind of insights we need from practitioners with direct family interaction experience," she said, reviewing my hastily scribbled notes about communication protocols I'd developed at Riverside General. Have you considered pursuing specialized certification in pediatric family advocacy? Specialized certification in pediatric family advocacy. A legitimate professional pathway that would expand rather than abandon my nursing expertise. Kim handed me information about a program she was developing, a 6-month certification course for experienced nurses who wanted to specialize in family support services. We're looking for participants who combine clinical knowledge with exceptional family communication skills, she explained. The program is intensive, but graduates have been hired by children's hospitals throughout the region. There's enormous demand for professionals who can bridge the gap between medical treatment and family support. Driving home from Portland that evening, I felt more alive and hopeful than I had in months. The certification program represented everything I'd always wanted to pursue professionally: the opportunity to expand my expertise while helping families navigate medical crises more effectively. But I also knew that pursuing this path would require confronting the Caldwell family's expectations about my appropriate role and future priorities. Over the following weeks, I began carefully researching what it would take to enroll in Dr. Kim's certification program. The coursework could be completed part-time while maintaining my current nursing position, but it would require significant time commitment and would clearly signal my intention to advance my own career, rather than transition away from direct patient care. The financial requirements were manageable. My nursing salary could cover tuition costs if I was careful about other expenses. More challenging was the emotional preparation required to assert my own professional ambitions against months of conditioning that had taught me to view such aspirations as selfish and inappropriate for someone in my position. I also began secretly reconnecting with nursing school classmates who had pursued specialized career paths rather than settling into traditional hospital roles. Jessica Martinez, my former study partner who now directed a pediatric family support program in Sacramento, became my unofficial career counselor during late-night phone conversations. Emma, Jessica said during one particularly encouraging call, I've been wondering what happened to you professionally. You were the most innovative student in our pediatric rotation, always coming up with creative approaches to family communication. I expected to see your name in nursing journals by now. Her words hit me like a revelation. I had been innovative and creative before I'd been taught that such qualities were charming, but ultimately inappropriate for my social position. Jessica remembered a version of myself that I'd almost forgotten existed, someone who generated ideas rather than simply supporting other people's initiatives. I've been exploring family advocacy certification, I admitted, testing how it felt to voice my professional ambitions aloud again. There's a program at Portland Children's Hospital that focuses on exactly the kind of work I've always been passionate about. That's fantastic, Jessica responded immediately. Family advocacy is exploding as a specialty. Hospitals are finally recognizing that emotional support isn't just nice to have. It's essential for effective medical care. You'd be incredible in that field. Not you'd be helpful to your husband's career, or you'd be good support for physicians' work, but you'd be incredible as an independent professional contributing specialized expertise to healthcare improvement. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally came 6 weeks before our scheduled wedding, triggered by my decision to submit an application for Dr. Kim's certification program. I had planned to discuss the opportunity with Michael during a quiet dinner at my apartment, hoping to present it as professional development that would enhance rather than threaten our shared future. Michael, I began carefully as we finished the meal I'd prepared, I've been exploring some continuing education opportunities that I think could really benefit my nursing career. He looked up from his dessert with polite interest. What kind of opportunity? Mom mentioned that there are excellent courses for medical wives about managing physician-family households. Managing physician-family household. Even my mention of continuing education was immediately filtered through assumptions about my appropriate role rather than considered as independent professional development. Actually, I said, gathering courage, I've been accepted into a pediatric family advocacy certification program at Portland Children's Hospital. It's a 6-month intensive course that would qualify me for specialized positions in family support service. Michael's expression shifted from polite interest to concerned confusion. Family Advocacy Certification. Emma, why would you want to pursue more specialized nursing credentials when we're planning to start a family soon after the wedding? When we're planning to start a family. This was the first I'd heard of definitive family planning timelines, though I realized that such decisions had probably been made for me, just like everything else about our future together. I didn't know we'd made specific decisions about when to have children, I said carefully. I thought that would be something we'd discuss together based on both of our career goals and personal readiness. Michael set down his fork with the deliberate motion of someone preparing to address a serious misunderstanding. Emma, we've talked about this. Part of joining the Caldwell family means understanding that certain life timing makes sense, given our social responsibilities and professional obligations. Our social responsibilities and professional obligations. My reproductive timeline was apparently subject to external expectations rather than personal choice, just like everything else about my identity had become. What if I told you, I said, feeling something break open inside me, that I want to pursue this certification program regardless of family planning timeline? What if my professional development is important enough to me that I'm willing to coordinate childcare with career advancement rather than abandoning one for the other? The question created a silence that felt dangerous, as if I'd suddenly revealed myself to be someone entirely different from the person Michael thought he was marrying. Emma, he said slowly, I'm starting to worry that you're having some kind of identity crisis. The woman I proposed to understood that marriage means making decisions together based on what's best for our shared future, not pursuing individual ambitions that could complicate our family planning. Identity crisis. My desire to continue growing professionally was being pathologized as psychological instability rather than recognized as legitimate career ambition. The woman he'd proposed to had been someone who'd already been systematically convinced to abandon her own goals in favor of supporting him. Maybe, I said, feeling reckless and liberated simultaneously, the woman you proposed to was someone I was becoming to please your family rather than someone I actually am. Michael stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. Emma, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you at all. You've never been someone who prioritized individual achievement over family responsibilities. You've never been someone who prioritized individual achievement. He was right, but only because I'd been systematically trained not to. The Emma Chen who had entered this relationship had been passionate about professional advancement and healthcare innovation. The Emma Chen sitting across from him had been carefully conditioned to view those qualities as character flaws requiring correction. What if the reason I've never seemed like someone who prioritized individual achievement, I said quietly, is because I've spent the last 18 months being taught that individual achievement was selfish and inappropriate for someone in my position. The conversation that followed revealed the complete extent of how thoroughly I'd been absorbed into the Caldwell family structure without ever being consulted about whether I wanted to be absorbed. Michael genuinely believed that my gradual transformation from independent professional to supportive wife was evidence of maturity and love rather than systematic diminishment. Emma, he said with the tone of someone explaining reality to a confused child, when you agreed to marry me, you accepted that your individual preferences would naturally align with our family's broader objectives. That's not diminishment, that's partnership. Partnership. A word that traditionally implied equal participation in decision-making had been redefined to mean my automatic submission to decisions made by other people. And what if I don't want my individual preferences to align with your family's broader objective? I asked, finally speaking the question that had been building inside me for months. What if I want to pursue professional goals that matter to me regardless of whether they serve your family's expectations? Michael's patience finally shattered completely. Then maybe you're not ready for marriage to someone from a family with serious responsibilities and social obligations. Maybe you need to decide whether you want to be part of something larger than yourself or continue focusing on personal ambitions that don't serve any greater purpose. Personal ambitions that don't serve any greater purpose. My desire to help families navigate medical crises more effectively, to improve communication between healthcare providers and vulnerable patients, to contribute specialized expertise to pediatric care improvement. all dismissed as personal ambitions without greater purpose. That night, after Michael left my apartment with the strained promise that we'd discuss my concerns after I'd had time to think more clearly, I sat on my couch staring at the family advocacy certification materials Dr. Kim had sent. The program description outlined exactly the kind of meaningful healthcare work I'd always dreamed of pursuing, work that would expand rather than abandon my professional expertise, work that would serve vulnerable families rather than elevating my social status. I thought about my parents who had sacrificed everything to build Golden Lotus from nothing, never once suggesting that my mother should abandon her own contributions to support my father's ambition. I thought about the pediatric families I'd worked with, who had trusted me with their most frightening moments and relied on my expertise to help them navigate impossible situations. I thought about the innovative programs I'd developed at Riverside General, programs that had improved patient outcomes and family satisfaction but had been dismissed as charming enthusiasm rather than recognized as legitimate professional accomplishment. Most importantly, I thought about the woman I'd been before I met the Caldwell family, someone who generated ideas, who solved problems, who believed her own expertise was valuable enough to contribute meaningfully to healthcare improvement. That woman was still there, buried under months of conditioning and social pressure, but she was awake now and demanding to be heard. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. I was going to leave Michael and the Caldwell family to pursue the certification program and rebuild my career in family advocacy, even if it meant starting over with nothing but my nursing degree and my unwavering belief that I had something meaningful to contribute to the world. The letter I left on Michael's kitchen counter 3 days later was brief but final. Michael, I'm choosing to become the woman I was always meant to be rather than the woman your family needed me to become. I hope someday you remember who you were before you decided that was enough, and I hope you find someone who enhances that person rather than diminishing herself to accommodate him. Moving out of the life I'd built with Michael felt like emerging from a carefully decorated prison cell. I rented a small studio apartment near Portland Children's Hospital, enrolled in Dr. Kim's certification program, and returned to full-time nursing at Riverside General while beginning the most challenging and rewarding educational experience of my professional life. The certification program was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Dr. Kim's curriculum combined advanced family therapy techniques with medical advocacy skills, teaching us how to identify families' emotional needs during medical crises and coordinate support services that addressed practical as well as psychological challenges. My classmates were experienced nurses, social workers, and healthcare administrators who had all chosen to specialize in family-centered care rather than pursuing traditional career advancement paths. For the first time in months, I was surrounded by people who viewed my expertise in family dynamics as valuable specialized knowledge rather than charming enthusiasm that needed professional guidance. Kim said after reviewing my first research project, "Your insights about communication protocols during pediatric emergencies are exactly the kind of evidence-based innovation our field needs. Have you considered submitting this work for publication?" She was suggesting that my professional observations were sophisticated enough to contribute to academic discourse about healthcare improvement. After months of being taught that my nursing insights were too narrow for serious medical discussions, I was being encouraged to share my expertise with the broader healthcare community. The 6-month certification program flew by in a blur of intensive coursework, practical training, and research projects that challenged me intellectually in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I was learning advanced family therapy techniques, crisis intervention strategies, and advocacy skills that transformed my understanding of what effective patient care could accomplish. More importantly, I was remembering who I had always been beneath the Caldwell family's systematic conditioning. The Emma Chen who graduated from the family advocacy program was someone who generated innovative solutions to complex problems, who understood family dynamics during medical crises better than most healthcare professionals, and who possessed specialized expertise that was increasingly valued by progressive medical institutions. Dr. Kim offered me a position with her team at Portland Children's Hospital before I'd even completed the certification requirement. "Emma, we need someone with your combination of clinical experience and family communication expertise," she said during our final project review. "You've demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that family advocacy requires." The position offer represented everything I'd always dreamed of professionally: the opportunity to work with families during their most vulnerable moments, while contributing to systemic improvements in pediatric care. More importantly, it was recognition that my expertise was valuable enough to merit independent professional responsibility rather than supportive assistance to other people's work. I accepted the position and spent the next 2 years building the most comprehensive family advocacy program Portland Children's Hospital had ever implemented. We developed communication protocols that significantly reduced family anxiety during pediatric procedures, created support groups that helped parents navigate complex medical decisions, and established advocacy services that ensured families' voices were heard during treatment planning. The program's success attracted attention from hospitals throughout the region, and I began consulting with other institutions about implementing similar family-centered care initiatives. Within 18 months, I was speaking at national conferences about innovative approaches to pediatric family support and publishing research about the connection between family advocacy services and improved patient outcomes. My work was being recognized, not as narrow nursing specialization but as essential healthcare innovation that addressed gaps in traditional medical treatment. The professional identity I'd been taught to abandon was flourishing in ways I'd never imagined possible. 3 years after walking away from the Caldwell family, I was directing family advocacy services for a network of children's hospitals and had just opened my own consulting practice focused on developing community-based wellness programs. The work combined everything I'd always been passionate about: direct patient care, family support, healthcare innovation, and systemic change that made medical treatment more accessible and compassionate. That's when the phone call came that would complete the most extraordinary reversal of circumstances I could have imagined. "Dr. Chen," my assistant said, knocking on my office door with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, "there's a call on line 1 that you need to take personally. It's Patricia Caldwell from Millbrook." I sat in my office, now located in the building that housed the most innovative family advocacy program in Oregon, and tried to process the impossibility of Patricia Caldwell calling me for professional consultation. Patricia's voice sounded strangely diminished. "I hope you'll forgive this unexpected contact. Riverside General Hospital is facing some significant challenges with patient satisfaction and family support services. We're exploring partnerships with experts in family-centered care." The irony was breathtaking. The woman who had systematically dismantled my professional confidence was now acknowledging my expertise in exactly the field she'd tried to steer me away from. The family that had dismissed my nursing insights as charming but irrelevant was now desperate for the specialized knowledge I'd developed by refusing to accept their limitations. "What specific challenges are you facing?" I asked, maintaining professional composure while internally marveling at the complete reversal of our former power dynamic. "Patient satisfaction scores have declined dramatically," Patricia admitted. "Families are choosing hospitals in Portland over our facility. Even though we maintain excellent clinical outcomes, they're reporting that we lack appropriate emotional support and family communication service." Everything Patricia had dismissed as nursing enthusiasm was now essential to her hospital's survival. The family-centered approaches she'd considered inappropriately emotional were now recognized as competitive advantages that determined where families chose to seek medical care for their children. The consultation meeting took place at my wellness center, with Patricia and Michael sitting across from me in the conference room, where I regularly met with hospital administrators, seeking to improve their family support services. The woman who had once made me feel inadequate was now taking notes as I outlined evidence-based family advocacy strategies that could improve patient satisfaction and clinical outcomes. "Your approach to family communication during medical crises is exactly what we need," Patricia said, reviewing the program description I'd prepared. "We had no idea that family advocacy had become such a sophisticated specialty. The nursing expertise she'd encouraged me to abandon had evolved into a recognized healthcare specialty that commanded professional respect and competitive salary." But the most profound moment came when Patricia mentioned something that changed my understanding of everything that had happened between us. "Emma," she said, her composure finally cracking, "I need to be honest about something that I should have shared much earlier.
After you left Michael, I found his private journal. He'd been writing about you throughout your engagement, and what I discovered made me realize how completely I'd misunderstood what you brought to our family. She handed me a leather-bound journal with pages marked by sticky notes, her hands trembling slightly as she passed it across the conference table. I think you need to see what he really thought about you, because it's nothing like what I assumed he was thinking. Michael's handwriting filled page after page with observations about my work with pediatric families, detailed descriptions of innovative approaches I'd developed for managing family communication during medical emergencies, and his growing admiration for expertise that his medical training had never taught him to recognize. Emma sees patterns in family dynamics that I completely miss. Read one entry dated just weeks after we'd started dating. Today she spent 30 minutes with the Patterson family while their daughter was in surgery, and somehow helped them process information I'd given them in a way that reduced their panic and helped them make better decisions about post-operative care. I'm learning that effective medicine requires understanding people as complete systems, not just treating diseases in isolation. Another entry, written after one of our early conversations about healthcare innovation. Emma's ideas about family advocacy aren't just nursing insights, they're sophisticated approaches to patient care that could revolutionize how we handle medical emergencies. She understands things about healing that medical school never addressed. I wish my parents could see that she's not just supporting my career, she's teaching me to be a better physician.
The final entry, dated just days before I'd left him. I think I'm losing the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, because I let my family convince me that her professional expertise was somehow threatening to my own advancement. Emma doesn't just treat patients, she transforms how families experience medical care. I've been such a fool to think that diminishing her abilities would somehow enhance mine. Looking up from the journal, I saw tears in Patricia's eyes for the first time since I'd known her. I was so focused on protecting what I thought our family legacy should be that I nearly destroyed what it could become. She said quietly. Michael has been miserable for 3 years, and our hospital is failing because we forgot that medicine is about healing people as complete human beings, not just treating diseases efficiently. 6 months later, I stood in front of the Riverside General Hospital Board of Directors presenting a comprehensive family advocacy program that would transform their approach to pediatric care. Michael sat in the back of the room, no longer the conflicted man who had chosen family expectations over personal values, but someone who had finally learned to recognize expertise regardless of its source. The program I designed for Riverside General became a model for rural hospitals throughout Oregon, demonstrating that family-centered care wasn't just appropriate for large urban medical centers, but essential for any institution that wanted to serve patients effectively. Within a year, their patient satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and they were attracting families who had previously traveled to Portland for pediatric care. Michael and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, based on mutual respect for each other's professional expertise and shared commitment to transforming healthcare delivery. The man who had once suggested I abandon my nursing career to support his advancement was now my strongest advocate for expanding family advocacy services throughout the region. You were right about everything, he told me during one of our early reconciliation conversations. Healthcare does need family advocates. Emotional support during medical crises is essential for effective treatment, and my medical training gave me only part of what patients actually need. I should have defended your expertise instead of letting my family convince us both that it was somehow inferior to mine. Patricia's transformation was equally remarkable. The woman who had once tried to diminish my professional identity became one of the strongest supporters of family advocacy programming in the State Medical Association. She began speaking at conferences about the importance of family-centered care and regularly referred other hospitals to my consulting practice. I learned something crucial from watching you rebuild your career, she told me during the grand opening celebration for our expanded Family Advocacy Center. True family legacy isn't about maintaining existing structures, it's about empowering the next generation to build something better than what came before. The bronze plaque at the entrance to our wellness center didn't just commemorate our program's success, it celebrated the moment when authentic recognition replaced inherited prejudice. and when a family learned that true strength comes from supporting each other's growth rather than requiring conformity to outdated expectations. In Michael's journal, I keep it in my office as a reminder that sometimes the people who love us most see our worth even when they're temporarily convinced to hide that recognition, and that the most powerful transformation isn't proving others wrong but helping them discover what they knew was right all along. The little nurse who supposedly needed finishing school to become an appropriate medical wife had actually become the healthcare innovator who revolutionized how entire medical systems approached patient care. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting revenge on the people who underestimated you. It's building something so undeniably valuable that even your critics become your biggest supporters. Standing in that wellness center I'd created from nothing but determination and genuine expertise, surrounded by families whose lives had been improved by the programs Patricia had once dismissed as inappropriate nursing enthusiasm, I realized that authentic success isn't measured by how completely you conform to other people's expectations. It's measured by how fully you become the person you were always meant to be, and how many other people's lives become better because you had the courage to believe in your own worth. The transformation that began with a desperate phone call from Patricia Caldwell became something far more profound than either of us could have anticipated. What started as a business consultation evolved into a complete reimagining of how medical families could support innovation rather than suppress it, and how healthcare institutions could embrace change rather than cling to outdated hierarchy. Working with Riverside General Hospital to implement comprehensive family advocacy services opened my eyes to the systemic nature of the problems I'd encountered in my own experience with the Caldwell family. Their resistance to my professional expertise hadn't been personal prejudice, it had been institutional conditioning that taught medical establishments to value conformity over innovation, tradition over adaptation, and hierarchy over collaboration. The hospital's initial assessment revealed patterns that extended far beyond patient satisfaction scores. Exit interviews with nurses who had left Riverside General over the past 5 years showed a consistent theme of talented professionals feeling undervalued and intellectually stifled. Many had moved to more progressive institutions where their ideas about patient care innovation were welcomed rather than dismissed as inappropriate enthusiasm. Jennifer Walsh, the former head of pediatric nursing, who had resigned 6 months before my consultation began, agreed to participate in our reform planning process. Her insights about the institutional culture that had driven away innovative healthcare providers were both heartbreaking and illuminating. I spent 7 years at Riverside trying to implement family-centered care protocols, Jennifer explained during our strategy. Every proposal was met with concerns about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, preserving physician authority, and avoiding emotional complications that might interfere with clinical efficiency. They wanted nurses who followed procedures without questioning whether those procedures actually served patients' best interests. Her experience mirrored my own journey with the Caldwell family's systematic discouragement of independent thinking, disguised as guidance about professional appropriateness. The institution had been systematically driving away its most innovative healthcare providers because their ideas challenged existing power structures rather than supporting them. Patricia's participation in these reform discussions revealed how completely her perspective had shifted since discovering Michael's journal. The woman who had once dismissed my nursing insights as charming but irrelevant was now advocating for institutional changes that would prioritize clinical innovation over administrative convenience. We've been operating under the assumption that medical expertise flows only from physicians to support staff, she said during one particularly intense planning session. But Emma's work demonstrates that effective patient care requires expertise from multiple sources, and some of the most important innovations come from professionals who interact directly with families during medical crises. The recognition that medical expertise flowed from multiple sources represented a fundamental challenge to everything the Caldwell family had traditionally believed about healthcare hierarchy. Patricia was essentially acknowledging that the nursing insights she'd spent months teaching me to minimize were actually essential to effective medical care. The family advocacy program we designed for Riverside General became a pilot project for rural hospital transformation throughout Oregon. Rather than simply adding family support services to existing structures, we redesigned their entire approach to patient care around the principle that healing required addressing emotional and social needs, alongside clinical treatment. The implementation process took 18 months and required retraining virtually every staff member about collaborative healthcare delivery. Physicians learned to consult with family advocates during treatment planning. Nurses were empowered to recommend therapeutic interventions based on family assessment, and administrators began measuring success based on holistic patient outcomes rather than just clinical efficiency metrics. The results exceeded every projection we'd made during the planning phase. Patient satisfaction scores improved by 40% within the first year, nurse retention rates increased dramatically, and most significantly, clinical outcomes improved as families became more engaged partners in treatment, rather than passive recipients of medical procedure. Richard Sterling, the chief medical officer who had initially been skeptical about family advocacy programming, became one of our strongest institutional supporters after observing how the changes affected patient care quality. "I've been practicing medicine for 25 years, he told me during our one-year evaluation meeting, and I've never seen interventions that improved both patient outcomes and staff satisfaction simultaneously. What you've created here isn't just family support, it's a completely different model of how healthcare can function when we prioritize collaboration over hierarchy." The success at Riverside General attracted attention from hospital systems throughout the Pacific Northwest, and my consulting practice expanded rapidly as other institutions sought to implement similar family-centered care transformation. Each new project taught me something different about the systemic barriers that prevented healthcare innovation and the institutional changes required to support collaborative patient care. More importantly, the work was fulfilling in ways I'd never experienced during my time trying to conform to Caldwell family expectations. I was solving complex problems that mattered deeply to vulnerable families, developing innovative approaches that improved healthcare delivery, and building programs that created meaningful change in how medical institutions served their community. The personal reconciliation with Michael happened gradually over the course of these professional transformations. He began attending our planning meetings as a representative of the emergency medicine department, initially maintaining careful professional distance, but gradually engaging more authentically as he witnessed the impact of family advocacy services on patient care. "Emma," he said after observing a particularly successful family intervention during a pediatric emergency, "I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than I realized when I first asked for your forgiveness. I didn't just fail to support your professional ambitions, I failed to recognize that your expertise could have made me a better physician from the beginning." His acknowledgement meant more than I'd expected, because it represented recognition of what I'd always known about my own capability. The nursing insights he'd been taught to view as supportive rather than contributory were actually specialized knowledge that could enhance medical care when properly valued and utilized. Our renewed relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect for each other's professional expertise, rather than the hierarchical dynamic that had characterized our original engagement. Michael was learning to see collaboration as strength rather than threat, while I was discovering that partnership could enhance rather than diminish individual achievement when both people were committed to supporting each other's growth. The most profound transformation occurred within the Caldwell family itself as Patricia began advocating for systemic changes in how medical families approached career development and professional support. She started speaking at medical spouse conferences about the importance of encouraging rather than limiting family members' professional ambition. "I spent years believing that protecting my family's medical legacy meant ensuring that everyone conformed to traditional role expectations," she shared during a keynote presentation at the Oregon Medical Spouses Association annual conference. "But I learned that true legacy building means empowering the next generation to exceed what previous generations accomplished, not forcing them to replicate outdated patterns." Her advocacy for professional equality within medical families became a significant force for cultural change throughout the regional medical community. Other physician spouses began reaching out to discuss their own struggles with balancing professional ambitions and family expectations, many discovering that their individual talents could contribute to rather than compete with their family's medical careers. Robert Caldwell's transformation was perhaps the most surprising aspect of our institutional reform process. The man who had once evaluated my worth based primarily on my family's social status became one of the strongest advocates for merit-based professional recognition, throughout the hospital system. Emma's success has taught me something crucial about leadership, he said during a board meeting where we were presenting expansion plans for family advocacy services. The most effective leaders aren't those who demand conformity to existing structures. They're those who recognize talent regardless of its source and create systems that allow that talent to flourish. Recognizing talent regardless of its source and creating systems for talent to flourish represented a complete philosophical reversal from the man who had once suggested that my restaurant owner, parents represented inadequate preparation for medical family membership. He was learning that authentic leadership meant supporting innovation rather than suppressing it. The expansion of our family advocacy programs throughout the region created opportunities for me to address some of the broader systemic issues that had shaped my own experience with healthcare hierarchy. I began developing training programs for medical institutions about recognizing and utilizing diverse forms of healthcare expertise, challenging traditional assumptions about who could contribute meaningful innovations to patient care. The training curriculum addressed unconscious bias in medical settings, communication barriers between different healthcare disciplines, and institutional practices that inadvertently discouraged collaboration and innovation. The goal was to help healthcare systems create environments where all professionals could contribute their expertise fully, rather than being limited by hierarchical expectations about appropriate roles and boundaries. Kim, my mentor from the original Family Advocacy Certification Program, became a close collaborator in developing these institutional training initiatives. Her research provided the theoretical framework while my practical experience with systemic bias offered real-world applications for the concepts we were teaching. Emma, she said during one of our curriculum development sessions, your journey from nursing specialization to healthcare system transformation represents exactly the kind of professional evolution our field needs. You've demonstrated that individual expertise can create institutional change when someone has the courage to challenge existing limitations. Individual expertise creating institutional change through challenging existing limitations perfectly captured what had happened during my transformation from diminished medical wife to recognized healthcare innovator. The personal journey of reclaiming my professional identity had evolved into systemic advocacy for creating healthcare environments where all professionals could contribute their full capability. The most meaningful validation of this work came when I was invited to present research about family advocacy outcomes at the National Pediatric Healthcare Conference. Standing on that stage addressing hundreds of healthcare professionals about innovations I'd developed through refusing to accept limitations others had tried to impose on me, I felt the complete reversal of my journey from the woman who had been taught to minimize her expertise to avoid social inappropriate. The presentation focused on data showing that family advocacy services didn't just improve patient satisfaction, they actually enhanced clinical outcomes by helping families become more effective partners in treatment planning and post-care management. The research demonstrated that emotional support wasn't ancillary to medical treatment, but integral to achieving optimal healthcare results. During the question and answer session following my presentation, Patricia Caldwell stood up in the audience to offer a perspective that stunned everyone present, including me. I want to share something with this audience that relates directly to Dr. Chen's presentation, Patricia said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. 5 years ago, I was Dr. Chen's mother-in-law and I spent considerable effort trying to convince her that her nursing expertise was inappropriate for someone marrying into a medical family. I was wrong in ways that nearly cost our family and our hospital system one of the most innovative healthcare professionals I've ever encountered. The auditorium fell completely silent as Patricia continued her unprecedented public acknowledgement of how thoroughly she'd misjudged my professional capability. Chen's journey from nursing specialization to healthcare system transformation happened not because of family support but despite family opposition, she continued. Her success represents what our medical community could achieve if we stopped limiting professionals based on traditional role expectations and started recognizing expertise wherever it emerges. The standing ovation that followed Patricia's remarks wasn't just recognition of presentation, it was acknowledgement of a broader conversation about how medical institutions could better support innovation and collaboration rather than enforcing hierarchical limitations.
that prevented optimal patient care. After the conference, dozens of healthcare professionals approached me about consulting opportunities, research collaborations, and speaking engagement. More importantly, many shared their own stories about struggling against institutional limitations that prevented them from contributing their full expertise to healthcare improvement. These conversations revealed that my experience with the Caldwell family was part of a much larger pattern of systematic underutilization of healthcare talent throughout the medical community. Talented professionals in nursing, social work, therapy, and other specializations were routinely discouraged from pursuing innovations that challenged traditional physician-centered care models. The movement that emerged from these discussions became known as the Collaborative Healthcare Initiative, focused on creating institutional structures that supported interdisciplinary innovation, rather than reinforcing hierarchical barriers between different types of medical expertise. I found myself at the center of a regional transformation in how healthcare systems approached professional development and patient care optimization. Within 3 years of that devastating engagement party where Patricia had publicly dismissed my professional capabilities, I was directing collaborative healthcare programs for hospital systems throughout the Pacific Northwest. The work combined everything I'd always been passionate about: direct patient care, family support, institutional innovation, and systemic change that made healthcare more effective and accessible. Michael and I married again in a ceremony that truly reflected our shared values, rather than social expectations imposed by others. The celebration took place at Golden Lotus, my parents' restaurant, surrounded by families whose lives had been improved by our healthcare program, colleagues who had become collaborators in institutional transformation, and friends who had supported my journey from professional diminishment to recognized expertise. Patricia and Robert Caldwell participated fully in the celebration, no longer as hierarchical authorities whose approval I needed, but as family members who had learned to recognize and support each other's contributions, regardless of their source. The transformation in our relationship represented broader changes in how medical families could approach professional development and mutual support. "Emma," Patricia said during her wedding toast, "you taught our family that true strength comes not from maintaining existing structures, but from empowering each other to build something better than what existed before. Thank you for refusing to become smaller so that we could feel bigger, and for showing us that collaboration creates more value than hierarchy ever could." The wellness center I eventually opened represented the culmination of everything I'd learned about creating healthcare environments that truly served patients' comprehensive needs. The Sarah Caldwell Memorial Wellness Center, named in honor of the woman Patricia had become rather than the woman she'd been, combined family advocacy services, community health programs, professional development training, and research initiatives focused on collaborative healthcare innovation. The center became a model for community-based healthcare that addressed social determinants of health alongside clinical treatment, demonstrating that healing required attention to emotional, financial, and social factors that traditional medical institutions often overlook. We provided services for families navigating medical crises, while also training healthcare professionals to work more effectively across disciplinary boundaries. Most importantly, the center represented proof that individual transformation could create institutional change when someone had the courage to reject limitations others tried to impose. The little nurse who had supposedly needed finishing school to become appropriate for medical family membership had become the healthcare innovator whose work was being studied and replicated throughout the region. Standing in that wellness center during our grand opening celebration, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives had been improved by programs I'd developed through refusing to accept other people's definitions of my capabilities, I realized that authentic success wasn't measured by conforming to external expectations. It was measured by how fully you became the person you were always meant to be, and how many other lives became better because you had the courage to believe in your own work. The bronze plaque at our entrance didn't just commemorate our program's achievements, it celebrated the moment when authentic recognition replaced inherited prejudice, when individual expertise was valued over social conformity, and when a family learned that true legacy comes from empowering each other's growth rather than requiring submission to outdated expectations. Michael's journal, which I still kept in my office, had become more than a reminder of hidden recognition. It was evidence that sometimes the people who love us most see our potential even when they're temporarily convinced to suppress that recognition. The entries he'd written during our original engagement revealed that he'd always known I was capable of transforming healthcare delivery. He'd just been taught to believe that acknowledging my expertise would somehow diminish his own authority. The woman who stepped out of that BMW at the wellness center opening wasn't seeking revenge on people who had underestimated her. She was celebrating the creation of something meaningful that existed because she'd refused to accept limitations others had tried to impose. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but building something so valuable that even your former critics become your strongest supporters. Looking back on the journey from that devastating engagement party to the wellness center grand opening, I understood that the Caldwell family's attempt to diminish my professional identity had actually catalyzed the most significant growth of my career. Their systematic conditioning had forced me to choose between becoming someone I wasn't and reclaiming someone I'd always been, and that choice had led to innovations that improved healthcare delivery for thousands of families throughout the region. The little nurse who supposedly trapped a doctor's son had actually freed an entire healthcare system from limitations that prevented optimal patient care. True transformation happens, not when you prove you were right all along, but when you build something so undeniably valuable that it changes how everyone else understands what's possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.